So the great debate, traditional zero turns as you see on the right versus Walker dedicated bagger. We all know they're the biggest name in dedicated bagging. We know that Exmark and Toro are the biggest names in regular zero turns. So it's going to weigh out the pros and cons of each machine, and I'll give you my opinion on what I think is best. And obviously every single every single company is a little bit different, so be sure to leave your opinion below, and of course use logic. If you have some dumbass, hateful, ignorant ass opinion of some like similar to a Ford versus Chevy argument, then nobody gives a shit. So let's get into this. So first things first, super simple operating controls. You just have the bars that come up, turn on the blades, and throttle wide open. Whereas with the traditional, or not traditional, the dedicated baggers, you have once your blades are up and running, you have the lever to push forward, and then you have to hold the controls back to control your speed and your turning. The next thing would be better stripes, just hands down. Some people like the Walker third wheel stripe, whatever that is in the middle. I think it looks like shit. So next thing would be the fast top speeds. You can get a ton of grass cut, and you can get a lot of ground covered in a very short amount of time, especially if you have bigger properties. And the next thing is that you have the real zero turn capabilities. They're very quick to turn around, and they're very nimble. You don't have a big hopper and 4 feet of machine behind you to worry about, which is very nice to have, especially for new guys that are still kind of new to turning around with the equipment on a lawn. And next would be belt-driven blade systems. I like the idea of that because they're a lot cheaper than a gearbox system, which the Walkers have. So next thing would be that it's extremely simple to change the deck height. All you really have to do is just push forward with the lever on your foot, and then you adjust with one pin. And with a zero turn Exmark Toro, you can go a lot more exact with your height, anywhere from I believe 1 inch to 4 inches, and they're all 1/4 inch intervals the whole way through. With the Walker, you have like 6 different holes, and if you don't have the sticker on the deck, you don't know what your cutting height is unless you know the machines very well. So yeah, that's kind of that. And there's a reason the biggest companies in the nation use them. Companies like Brickman and any other top ones, I can't think of them. And obviously, yeah, that's partially because they have a huge volume discount that they get from Toro or Exmark or whoever, but they wouldn't be using them if they weren't efficient machines. The next thing that I really liked about the zero turns is you're not bagging grass. You don't have to figure out a way to collect and haul away all this grass. And also, one thing that's big with my company and my area where we were working in is that you have to pay $12 or $16 a cubic yard or something like that in the summertime to dump grass. In the fall and spring, it's a little bit cheaper, but I don't want to have to pay money to dump grass, something that can be just totally avoided just to begin with. So and also, I didn't like the idea of if you fill up your dump truck, you have to leave the job site or dump trailer, or if you have all your bags, if you're using bags or barrels are all full, and you have to go to the yard waste site, dump out the grass, and then get back to work. And I don't like the idea of that. And the next thing would be to just have a larger fuel tank. You can mow for multiple days in a row depending on how big your accounts are with with an Exmark or Toro, because you have like, I think it's a 12 or 14 gallon tank, and with a Walker I think it's maybe a 4 or 5 gallon tank. So yeah, it might be a little bit more fuel efficient because you have a smaller deck and smaller engine, so it's not burning as much fuel with the dedicated bagger. But you can't mow multiple days if you have a decent amount of accounts with a Walker. And lastly, you have less grease zerks, especially on the newer machines. The older machines did have a lot of grease zerks that had to be greased at different intervals, but on new Exmarks and Toros, and I don't know about the Skags, we never ran them. We ran Exmark and we've demoed Walkers multiple times just to see what they were like for cutting grass, spring cleanups, and fall cleanups. So yeah, the grease zerks on the newer Exmarks are they're only greased once per year, so they hardly take any time, and that's the biggest thing. Grease is cheap, but the time to do that, especially if you have a large fleet, can take a little while. So Now to the cons of a traditional zero-turn mower. They're heavier than dedicated baggers, and this is true up until the baggers start to fill up, and especially if it's wet. You have a lot of weight on the machine. But you can rut up a lawn pretty easily, especially smaller properties, but and it's just the way that it is. So the next thing I don't like about traditional zero-turns is that you have to manually lift up the deck with your foot to not scalp the lawn. And if you're a new operator or you have an employee that's a new operator, they aren't probably thinking about that when they go up to mow over a little mound, or if there's a depression in the turf that they need to make sure they don't scalp. A lot of times they won't remember to do that. And the nice thing was with the dedicated baggers, the way they're set up, the decks lift up basically on their own, and you don't have to really worry about scalping as much. And I know I mentioned fast top speeds were a pro, but they're also a con, because if you have a new operator that isn't used to the speed, you can tear up the turf really easily, or you can hit a house or a fence or a car or whatever. And another bad thing, even though I said this in the first one, is that they are very quick to turn around, and that can be bad because you can tear up the turf easily, especially when wet and if it's somebody that's inexperienced. And the last con with the traditional zero turn is that they're a pain in the ass to change blades. You either have to get you have to have a car jack that can lift high enough, and then you also have to have floor jacks that lift up high enough so you can actually get underneath the deck, or you have to go spend $250 on a jungle lift or whatever that brand is that lifts up the deck and it secures itself, and that's a big pain in the ass in my opinion. Or you have to like drive up your trailer ramp with the deck halfway off and do it that way, and so that's definitely a pain, especially if you need to change blades multiple times a week. So now let's get into the dedicated bagger pros. What I did like is that, I'd like to cut larger properties that are wide open, but if you have a smaller property, or if you have counts that are smaller, the smaller deck sizes with a dedicated bagger are a huge plus. You can get into small areas like fence gates and other tight areas without having to hop on another walk behind mower or a push mower if you're using the traditional zero turn riders for your crew. And like I said in the earlier slide, you have a lower risk of scalping especially with a new operator, because the deck kind of manages itself, which is nice. And don't get me wrong, you can still scalp, especially with the the Discharge Walker brand mowers. Those things are honestly garbage in my opinion. They leave terrible stripes, and they are so easy to scalp. It's just insane, but that's a whole nother subject for a different video. Anyway, next thing is they're much easier to change the blades. I just got done mentioning how much of a pain in the ass it is with the regular zero turn. All you have to do is pull out the 2 pins on the side of a walker. I don't know how the Exmark is, or the Skag, Cougar, Cheetah, whatever their dedicated bagger machine is, but pull out the pins and you lift it up and you latch it, and boom, you have access to the blades and the deck and everything else. So it's a very simple process. And the next thing I liked about the dedicated bagger is that when you're bagging, there's very little backpack blowing that needs to be done when you are mowing along. Nothing flies out and lands in the beds. A little bit will land on the driveway and things like that, and that's because what seems to be like when there's an opening in the air that's going through, some grass kind of sprays out a little bit, but and that's present with both dedicated baggers and traditional zero turns. But being as dedicated baggers bag all the time, that's a huge plus. And one thing I really did like with the walkers is that they have an alarm to let you know when the hopper is full. With a traditional zero turn, you kind of just have to listen by ear for when the bags are totally full, or you have to watch for leaves to be flying out from underneath the deck, because then you know that it's full. And having the alarm is a lot more efficient, in my opinion. So the next thing is that I like about with the dedicated bagger is that you can travel the opposite direction when doing a border pass to lift the blades of grass up, and then little to no grass will still get into the landscape beds. So what I mean by this is that as the summer goes and you're mowing and doing all the passes, you can, especially on like a commercial property where you're doing boulevards, or it's super narrow and you're doing the same direction every week because you don't want to go diagonal because it'll take 3 times as long. You basically can just go the opposite. If you're going, well, I can't really explain it with my hands, but if you're going the same direction, you can just reverse it and you don't have to worry about getting grass in the landscape beds because it's all going to the hopper, and it stands the grass back up, and it allows the turf to kind of grow better, which is one thing that I liked a lot about dedicated baggers. And the last thing is that the walkers have shear pins on their blade as a safety feature for preventing damage if you hit a rock or something hard, like, I don't know, like one of those little water utility things that stick up the metal things. They're all over here in Fargo, as well as down in the Minneapolis area. I don't know how they are the rest of the country, but I'm sure there are some utility things and things that can be hit, and they are a nice safety feature that I really like, because you just break a couple bolts, and then obviously it's going to be loud and you're going to hear the blades hitting each other, but then you just turn off the blades and you pop new shear pins in. So you got to make sure to keep tools around, first things first. But yeah, keep tools around, and I like that safety feature, because that way you don't end up messing up your belt or pulley or spindles or anything like that. And with the shear pins, that prevents breaking the gearbox. So now, the cons with a dedicated bagger. Make sure we're still recording. Yep, okay. The operating controls straight up suck ass on walkers. I'm not a fan of a drive lever which propels the machine forward, and then this makes the learning curve even longer for new operators, and you could easily lose control of the machine easier than on a regular zero turn, where you just need to let go of the machine and it'll stop. If you let go of the controls on a walker, you are going to be driving forward unless you fly off the seat or something. Then the machine will turn off, and I just didn't like that. So the next thing that I did not like about the dedicated bagger machines, they're longer. They're a lot longer than a regular zero turn, unless obviously they have the bagger system on them, but we're not talking about that. Just the machine in general. That means less room in your trailers, and they're not as nimble on properties. And the next thing would be that they have super narrow decks. I believe the largest is maybe 52 or 48, something like that, with the bagging machines, at least on Walker brands. I don't know the other Exmark and Toro. I'm sure they're all really similar. But they're not ideal for larger properties unless the client is willing to pay for it to be bagged, or they really want it to be bagged and are willing to pay. But the next thing I didn't like was that the hopper blocks your vision when you are turning around. You have to really make an effort to turn around and move your head and look up and over to make sure you're not going to hit anything. And this is a tough thing for new operators to learn as well. And if you guys are wondering why I keep referring to new operators, is because in the lawn, landscape, snow industry, you're going to have a lot of new guys working for you. A lot of people start, and a couple months later they say, oh, this isn't for me, and then boom, you're at square one. You got to find somebody else again. And it is it's not exactly the most high-paying job in the world. You're not going to get the best workers that you can find in the whole world to run mowers for you. That's just how it is. So yeah, that's why I keep referring to new operators. And also, if you're watching this and you haven't started a lawn business yet, you're probably going to be someone that's new to operating equipment. So it's very important to know all these things. So anyway, I'm getting off track. The next thing I didn't like was that there's an expensive initial purchase cost, and I believe the walkers were like around $16,000, $18,000. Don't quote me on this. Leave a hateful comment if I'm incorrect on this. Actually, I don't really give a shit. But the Exmark is fully loaded with a bagger system, and dethatch rake were around 12 to 14, so there's a few $1,000s saved. And the majority of the walkers, I believe, have Kohler engines, which I'm not a big fan of. They don't seem to last as long as the Kawasaki's, which are what most Toro and Exmarks are equipped with. And obviously, yeah, I haven't owned a walker, so I don't know the long-term maintenance cost, but I know that the relatively long-term maintenance cost of an Exmark, so this, for us, this was about 4.5 years that we owned owned a machine for the longest time. The maintenance cost is very low, as long as you don't blow up the engine, you keep up with your oil changes and things like that. And the next thing would be gearbox-driven blade systems instead of just simple belts and pulleys and spindles. I don't know. I don't like the idea of it. I do like the shear pin. That safety feature is sweet. However, I don't like the gearbox-driven blade systems, because if you get into some really rough turf that you're trying to cut, or weeds or whatever, they seem to not be able to handle that as well. And the belts can when they wear out, they're a lot cheaper to replace than a gearbox. So The next thing, I'm going to skip down to the bottom, is no suspension seat. So it equals for a rough ride. The Exmarks and Toros, so actually I don't know about the Toros, but I know the Exmarks for sure have the suspension seat upgrade that you can get, which makes it a lot smoother of a ride, and you have a lot less wear and tear on your operator, especially if that's you. If you're just starting out, you're going to be the one that's on the mower. You don't want to be so exhausted at the end of the day just from riding on the mower that you can't focus on the bigger tasks that you need to use, or that you need to put to use to make your business grow. Next thing would be that I mentioned it before, a pain in the ass to change the deck height. You have to jump off the mower, lift up the deck on one side, change out the pins, go to the other side, lift it up, change out the pins on that. I didn't like it. I mean, is there a better option? Not really, because they're front mounted decks. That's just how it is, but that's that. And lastly, I hate the logistics of dealing with grass in the summertime. In my area where we were working, it costs just a fortune to dump grass, and literally no company around runs Walker because of that. They don't, most of the time, they don't want to pay to dump grass, and even if they do, it's just the logistics of it. You have to haul it, you have to have a dump truck. Instead of having the dump truck work on a landscape site, they have to be sucking up grass all summer long, or you have to use the dump truck to pull your mower trailer and throw the grass into it and just deal with it. And it's an extra time expense, and it's just an extra monetary expense with having to spend money to dump the grass, whether you have to pay at a dump or you have to just drive to someone's farm or your own shop or whatever. I'm not a fan of bagging lawns in general, and that's mainly because of the logistics of having to move the grass from place to place. If you are just starting out and you have a really small rig, if you may just have just a pickup, and if you're trying to bag grass, you're not going to have much room. And if you have even a much larger rig, you have a dump truck and enclosed trailer and everything, it's still a pain in the ass. I don't like it, and I believe it's not needed. In my opinion, with the numbers we could kind of run, basically it paid off to spend the extra 2, 3, 5 minutes or whatever we're thinking on just on typical residential, to blow out the landscape beds and blow off the hard surfaces, instead of having to not only wear out more equipment because you're running your baggers. If you're running a traditional zero turn, you're running the baggers a lot longer. You're putting wear and tear on those, and it takes away its operating life, and you have to deal with the logistics, all that. The numbers didn't make sense to bag every single property. In some areas, you may be able to dump for free, and maybe it does work. That's kind of just for you guys to weigh out with your own businesses. So, the winner here, in my opinion, and what's better in this great debate, is the traditional zero turn. The speed of them, the simplicity of operation, as well as not having to deal with the logistics of bagging grass, were what drove me to make this choice. And of course, not only the finished product of the striped lawn with an Exmark or Toro versus just a Walker looks a lot better in my opinion. If you guys think differently, let me know in the comments below. If you have some ignorant, dumb shit to say, leave a comment below so all of us can laugh at you. And yeah, that's my take on traditional bagger, or traditional zero turn, versus dedicated bagging machines. If you like this kind of video, be sure to let me know, and subscribe to the channel. Hit us up on Instagram, Facebook, and Snapchat. And this has been Matt Wacek, and we'll see you in the next video.